back to Maths with Mrs. J. In our previous video, we used the technique of completing the square in order to derive the quadratic formula. I've got the quadratic formula written down here, just to remind us. It looks complicated, but believe me, once you've used it a few times, you will realise that it's actually quite easy to remember. Just a couple of things you might note about it. The bit that's under the square root sign is kind of important, and we'll be talking more about that in future videos. Just bear that in mind for now. The other thing I wanted you to bear in mind is that as I did with completing the square, some of the examples that we're working with here, you wouldn't normally have to use the quadratic formula to do. This one, for example, would be quite nice and easy to factorise and go ahead and use your null factor law. But because we've been asked to use the quadratic formula, we're going to do it. And I have deliberately picked these first few examples to be relatively simple, just so that the numbers work out easy for us to start with, all right? How do you go about using the quadratic formula? Well, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to write down what A, B, and C are. So A is your coefficient of your x squared, B is your coefficient of your x, and C is your constant term. Now we write down our formula. Negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay, negative B, so it'll be negative 6 plus or minus square root 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8 all over 2 times 1. Let's move up to, no, actually we won't move up to there because we won't have room. Okay, so we're going to get negative 6 plus or minus, that's 36 minus 32, which is 4, and that's all over 2, which is negative 6 plus or minus 2 all over 2. Now, negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4 divided by 2. So you get negative 4, or the other answer would be negative 6 minus 2, no, sorry, plus 2 is negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Let's just check that for a minute. If we were to factorise, we would get x plus 4, x plus 2 equals 0. So yes, x is negative 4 or negative 2. All right. Let's have a look at this one. Again, we start off by writing down what A, B, and C are. A is obviously 1, B is obviously 4, and C is negative 12. Write down your rule. X is negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Subbing in, so we get negative 4 plus or minus square root 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12 all over 2 times 1. So we get negative 4 plus or minus, so that's going to be 16. And because we're subtracting a negative, we're going to be adding, aren't we? So we get negative 4 plus or minus root 64 all on 2. 64 is a perfect square, isn't it? So we get negative 4 plus or minus 8 on 2. Let's split those into its two different entities. Negative 4 minus 8 is negative 12, divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 4 plus 8 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. Let's just check. This one is another one where we could have factorised quite easily. X plus 6, x minus 2 is 0. So yes, we do get x as 6 or negative, sorry, 2 or negative 6. So that works perfectly fine there, and that's not a problem. Now, I want to go on and do some further examples of this. It is something that we do need to practice. So let's do this example again. This one here also would be able to be factorised, but as I said, because we're just getting used to using the formula, I'm starting with fairly easy numbers. All right, first step, write down what your A, B and C are. A is 1, B is -1, C is -110. All right, your rule, negative B plus or minus root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So if B is -1, negative B is +1. -1 squared is 1, minus 4 times 1 times that, so it's going to be plus 440 all over 2A, which is 2. So we get 1 plus or minus root 441 on 2. Square root of 441 is 21. So we get 1 plus 21 on 2, or 1 minus 21 on 2. This first one gives you 22 on 2, which is 11. This one gives you -20 on 2, which is -10. And again, we could check this one by factorising. You'd factorise that by doing x minus 11, x plus 10 equals 0. So you're going to get x is 11 or -10. All right, just reinforcing the fact that normally speaking, if you're not given a particular method to use, you use whatever method is quickest and simplest. You wouldn't go about all of this sort of stuff unless you're asked to do it or unless it's actually necessary. Now, it is going to be necessary with this next example because we're not going to be able to factorise that one anyway, all right? And we have been asked to use the quadratic formula, so we're going to do it anyway. So A is 1, B is 2, C is -7. Again, write down your rule. Negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Subbing in, -2 plus or minus square root, so 2 squared is 4. So minus 4 times 1 times -7 is going to be adding 28 all over 2. So we're going to get -2 plus or minus root 32 on 2. Now, I have done a series of videos about surds. Square root 32 is not in simplest form because there is a factor that is a perfect square. That is the square root of 16 by 2, which is the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. So it's 4 root 2. So we get -2 plus or minus 4 root 2 on 2. And you can actually divide the 2 into each term. So you get -1 plus or minus 2 root 2. Now, because 2 is not a perfect square, this is the only way, or you can split them up, obviously, like that, but leaving it in this format is the only way to give the answers exactly. If you wanted an approximation to a certain number of decimal places, by all means, put it in your calculator. But normally we're concerned with exact answers when we're solving equations, at least to begin with. So I would leave it at that step unless asked otherwise. Okay, one more lot of examples just to get us a little bit more expert in the process. Last lot for this video. Let's have a look. So we've got x squared minus 5x minus 10 is 0. All right, what are we going to do first? What's our first step? Well, we've been asked to use the quadratic formula, so we're going to write down what A is, what B is, and what C is. Okay, then we're going to write our rule. Then we're going to sub in. So if B is -5, negative B will be +5. B squared will be 25. And we're going to get minus 4 times 1 times -10. So we're going to be adding 40 all over 2 times A, which is 2, which is 5 plus or minus root 65 on 2. And that's really all you can do there. 65 is not a perfect square. It's just slightly bigger than a perfect square, but it's not one itself. So I would leave it like that. Last one for this video. A is 2, B is -1, C is -5. We write our rule. x is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Subbing in, if b is -1, negative b is +1, b squared will be 1. Okay, we're subtracting 4 times 2 times -5. So we're adding 40, and 2a will be 4. So we get 1 plus or minus root 41 on 4. And again, 41 is not a perfect square, and it doesn't have any perfect square factors either. It doesn't have any factors other than 41 in itself, so we're going to leave it.